Hello and welcome to Border Crossings. This is a show that takes a special interest in issues of regional importance to the communities of Menlo Park, East Palo Alto, and Stanford. My name's Owen Byrd. Here with me today for yet another appearance on Border Crossings are the three mayors, Paul Colaci from Menlo Park, R.B. Jones from East Palo Alto, and Gary Fazzino from Palo Alto. During this show, we'll have an opportunity to hear from each of the mayors about the current hot issues within each of their communities, and then have a time to explore some regional issues of significance altogether. So why don't we begin the portion of the program that allows each mayor to give an update on his community, and begin with Mayor Colaci in Menlo Park.
Well, in Menlo Park, it's summertime and the living is easy, so we're about to slow down a little bit and take our summer break. We have just finished up on our budget. We have three different budgets. We have the general operating budget, we have our capital budget, and we also have a redevelopment agency, and we went through the budgets of those. Our news is the same, I think, as the news we've read in the papers. Sales tax is okay, but it's a little bit flat, and so we're not spending a little bit more, and it's business as usual, up from a tremendous year before. The big project we'll be doing in our budget is we have set aside $9 million in our redevelopment agency budget to go out and create a 3-acre park in the Bellhaven neighborhood. So that will be our big project upcoming this year. Recently we worked with Caltrans to okay some improvements to the Bayfront Expressway. So that's going to hopefully improve the intersection at University and Bayfront and at Willow and Bayfront. So that's a big project. They have about $30 million or so of money that they want to spend. Our Smart Growth Phase 1 program is our community visioning and going out and looking at our community and gathering data is about to finish up. So we're going to take a look to see what they've uncovered. And our recreation program that looks at our recreational facilities throughout our entire city to come back and make recommendations to us is about to finish up its Phase 1. And we allocated about $2 million more. So we have $5 million to go to spend on that when it comes back with its recommendations, and we expect that will be a fairly costly project, maybe on the order of 20 to 30 million, but that's a big one. And that's, in a nutshell, what we're doing in Menlo Park.
Mayor Jones, East Palo Alto.
Yeah, we have a lot to be excited about, especially in our priority areas, which is redevelopment. We can safely say now that Ravenswood 101 Phase 1 is complete. We have the tenants for that to happen. We are moving now in discussion around Phase 2. The housing, the new housing on Pugos is underway. That's coming along. The University Circle project, of course, the law project, is underway, and we expect within the next 8 months some really proactive kinds of things happening in that area. What we did as well, quite different from what we had been doing, we spent about $250,000 on a visioning process, whereas the community, mothers and fathers, stakeholders, city council, planning commission, and all the interested people are being interviewed, and the information about how we want our town to look, how we want our city to look, a comprehensive study of all of the city. We're probably a month and a half away from really getting down to what that vision would look like. It's very possible that the front door of East Palo Alto may in fact be the bay, as opposed to San Francisco Creek. And so we're excited about that as well. Just finished our own budgeting process, and 2 of my pet projects at least got through, and they certainly talked about the priority of the council. One, I've always asked for a code enforcement division. We want to clean our town up, and I think that's possible. So now we have a code enforcement division in the city of East Palo Alto, as opposed to police code enforcement and planning department code enforcement, which is separate and sometimes does not work well together. And secondly, we have a commission on aging for the first time. We do not have dedicated senior citizen housing in the city of East Palo Alto anymore. And we have a concern about those services for seniors, one, and the housing availability for seniors, and a way to keep our seniors in our community in terms of that. So we're excited about that, about those two new things at least happening in our budget. It's good to have some other areas to consider other than the police budget. and public safety budget in the city of East Palo Alto. We're fully staffed at 42 sworn officers, and things are going well. Crime is down, and the wall is down for Ravenswood 101, so there's some perceptions that's escaping over the fence, so to speak. And we're quite excited about that kind of thing that's happening.
Terrific. Thanks for that update. Mayor Fazzino, Palo Alto.
Well, Owen, as a planning commissioner, you could probably give this report as easily as I could. Certainly the most exciting celebration that we've had over the last few weeks was the Women's World Cup semifinal match at Stanford Stadium on July 4th, and I think a couple of my colleagues were here at that game, and it was an exciting event for the entire community, and I think we are delighted to have been part of this very special sporting event. I think it was indeed a seminal moment for women's sports in this country and for soccer in general. We did complete action on the Historic Preservation Ordinance after 2.5 years of discussion. I believe we ended up with a reasonable and limited ordinance, one which truly protects historic homes, but at the same time allows for a significant amount of flexibility in implementing the ordinance. The issue now is whether that controversial ordinance is going to be referended. The Palo Alto Homeowners Association is currently fanning through the community, trying to place that measure on the March 2000 ballot, and they have until the end of July to secure enough signatures to do so. Another issue of great interest is the future of the old Palo Alto Medical Foundation site, also known as SOFA, south of Forest area. The council had intended to discuss this issue at its meeting, I believe July 26th meeting, but the issue has been deferred until September or October because negotiations are currently going on with the various parties who are involved in these discussions. I think the major two issues for discussion include affordable housing and the possibility of a park on that site. Last night, Councilmember Mickey Schneider announced her resignation from the council, and so the council at our next meeting will be calling for a 2-year election to be consolidated with the general municipal election, which is taking place in November. This means we will have at least 4 new council members come January, and with term limits kicking in once again or having the full effect that they will have in the year 2001, by 2002 we will have something on the order of 7 new council members by that point. So dramatic change, largely as a result of term limits, which Palo Altans approved back in 1991. Fairly smooth budget process, which I think we were all pleased about.
Well, Gary, the issue you led off with prompts a regional question. Do you think next time World Cup comes to town that the programs can identify Palo Alto instead of San Francisco as the site of the match?
Hopefully so. You may recall that in 1994, when the Men's World Cup matches were held here, it was difficult for Men's World Cup to acknowledge the fact that these games were taking place at Stanford Stadium. It was San Francisco alone. At least this time we were able to convince them to designate these games as the Bay Area games as opposed to San Francisco only. So that's a step in the right direction.
One other regional question that's prompted by the initial overview of the two communities is the fact that Menlo Park and East Palo Alto are both engaged in visioning processes, prompted by 2 different concerns, but ultimately, I suppose, similar in content. Do you think that there may be possibilities through either visioning process to engage the communities on some of these regional issues?
Well, certainly we are using the exact same transportation expert that Menlo Park is using because the two are obviously related, and so we recognize that we can't talk about traffic at all without some collaboration with Palo Alto, Menlo Park in that effort, and I think that that's the greatest impediment to the whole region is the whole traffic. I read someplace not long ago that the San Mateo County Planning Commission, a planning board, made an announcement that within the next 5 years there would be an additional 7 million people in this whole Bay Area corridor. That's certainly something that causes some anxiety, with the city of East Palo Alto, not just in terms of traffic, but we want some of those folks to come and live in our community as well. They're going to be here. They can't all live in Foster City, in Palo Alto, Menlo Park. We want to participate as a part of this whole rim, this whole corridor. And so we want to get busy in all of those things that will affect the quality of life that causes people to transition from one community to another.
Yesterday we had a very encouraging meeting with Stanford. Stanford, for the first time, met with the three mayors to talk about a number of regional issues, and we devoted much of the session to discussion of the need for strong cooperation among the four jurisdictions on transportation issues, in particular possibility of a joint shuttle system, as well as a discussion about the possibility of restoring the old Dumbarton Rail service across the bay.
Gary, I'd like to come back in more detail to hear a little bit more about the meeting that the three of you had with Stanford officials, but I think at this point we have an opportunity to go to the first of the questions that have been gathered from interviews in the street.
The abandoned houses that are just sitting there and the property owners are not doing a thing with them. There's a lot of homeless people here that need places to stay. I don't know why they don't make those community houses for those people that don't have places to stay. I mean, if the owner doesn't want the land, I know a place personally on on Green Street that's been there for 11 years. They haven't done a thing with it.
Mayor Jones, that sounds like an issue for you. The question asked whether there are opportunities to provide housing for homeless people in some of the abandoned housing that currently exists in East Palo Alto.
It wouldn't make sense to use abandoned property to have a place for homeless people. Homeless people need a place, in fact, that is viable so that folks can discontinue being homeless. To take some place that's isolated and segregated and where there's absolutely no activity, no life skills being administered and monitored, is to just throw folks in a place. Right now, the three communities are talking and have begun some discussions around the whole homeless issue. And unfortunately, that citizen does not have that information at this point, and we are not full-fledged with it. But the cities of Menlo Park and Palo Alto in particular are talking about the VA hospital and some other kinds of things that may be a possibility around the homelessness issue in the three cities.
Let me follow up on that with you, Paul. What is the status of the potential for use of a portion of the VA hospital for the so-called Opportunity Center that has been proposed to serve the region?
Well, my understanding is that they're in negotiations. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
And they will, since it's VA and the VA is federal, we have no land use. We, Menlo Park, have no land use authority over it. So those negotiations can take place between the veterans and the homeless group. It's right next to Clara Mateo. It's controversial somewhat in the neighborhood because we have three facilities in Menlo Park that are fairly co-located in that area. I was there and I told you my story about being detained by the police. So I think it's quite a safe place back there, and it's not really. There's some transit problems associated with it, but it makes some sense. So I think that there's a possibility that it will move forward. I know that they're negotiating for it. Whether it's a permanent solution, I guess that's the question that we all have, is whether that's the right place for a permanent location, but it looks like it may be something in the interim.
Gary, I know you have addressed this issue on earlier episodes of this program. What, from Palo Alto's perspective, is the enthusiasm or concerns around the current status of the negotiations to site the facility at the VA?
Well, the city is very supportive of the concept of both a temporary and permanent homeless opportunities center, as long as that center concentrates on rehabilitative services for the homeless. We have talked with Menlo Park. We have met with representatives of the of PIA and the working group, which are the groups who have taken responsibility for making the Opportunities Center a reality. My view is that since the Veterans Administration building is available now, that PIA and the working group should move forward and secure that location for establishment of a program. At the same time, I am certainly willing to work with the Opportunity Center folks and identify a location for a temporary drop-in center here in Palo Alto. I think if they're able to demonstrate that they can manage this program successfully, that they can make a difference in people's lives, that over time support will grow in each of the three communities for the idea of a permanent facility. And I think at that point, location of that facility, I think, will become a secondary issue.
Isn't there a danger, though, in just knowing how hard it is to grind through the process, that once a facility is established at the Veterans Administration, that it will become functionally difficult or impossible to establish satellite facilities in the communities, or to eventually move the whole center to a different spot?
Well, there's always that possibility. At the same time, I think we acknowledge the fact that many homeless people do end up in or near downtown Palo Alto. And it probably makes sense to, at the very least, have a small drop-in center near services. And many services for the homeless are located in or on University Avenue. So even if the VA ends up being a more permanent facility, I would still be supportive of the idea of a smaller drop-in center somewhere near downtown Palo Alto. Not in a residential area, but certainly accessible to the downtown area where you have a number of services. In the long run, it's critical that the three communities work together to provide a variety of service. I think each of us has a responsibility to provide a certain percentage of homeless services.
If I could just add, excuse me, the nature of a federal facility precludes that it won't really be permanent. So it could be a long time, might be 5 years, might be 10 years, but it's not going to be permanent in view of the fact that the federal government owns that facility, and at some time may have a changing budget and all that. So even though it may persist, I guess, is what you're concerned with, I don't think it will be permanent in a way that you're suggesting.
RB?
My concern is exactly what was exhibited by the person speaking, that folks will not use the term Opportunity Center. I'm certainly not looking and certainly not in support of any notion of a center any place where people are just there because they're homeless. I'm not looking for a hangout place. I'm looking for a facility that I can actively encourage my peers to support and endorse, even if we have to put money into it or however we have to do it, that talks about moving folks from a mindset and a condition of homelessness into one where there are jobs availability, job opportunity, and that whole course of thing. If you hear and if you listen to the request of the constituent on the TV, on the monitor just now, very clearly it's something different from an Opportunity Center. And that's the thing that I want East Palo Alto in particular to co-take the lead in, so to speak. And that is defining what this homeless center will look like. And it certainly won't be this place that you can just hang out and not with the intention of moving from here to a better quality of life.
I'm sure this is an issue that we will revisit over time as the center becomes a reality. We have a second question now that was gathered by the camera crew. Let's go again to the video.
I have several dogs, and unfortunately they've been putting on weight because we don't have a good place to run them. I can't run as much as I used to. Would like to have a place that the dogs could run without having to be leashed, a fairly large open space or an accessible space. I'm sure responsible people like ourselves will pick up dog droppings and various other things. One of the problems is we have a dog who just recently had cancer surgery and can't really be, they removed the spleen. As a consequence, there's a concern about infection. And having this dog in a tightly enclosed area with other dogs, the tight Palo Alto dog run is a problem. And we'd much rather have a place where either we could let her run and clean up after her, or have several places so they're not so confined.
Because this issue of leash laws has been so current in Palo Alto lately, I think I'd rather start in the other two communities and say, number one, is an issue of dogs on leash or off leash an issue? And if it is, how do you address it?
I'm not sure that the leash issue is a big issue, but we have heard also the need for dog runs. So that's one I have heard. I have not heard that we have a problem with being leashed or unleashed dogs. As part of our recreational facilities study, we're looking at that. The dogs are going to have to compete with the soccer players and the baseball players and everyone, I think, to find some open space that's available. We have a Bayfront Park, which is east of Bayfront and east of 101, which is a former landfill site, but it's actually quite a beautiful park, and that's a really good place to go out and take the dog and run for Menlo Park residents who may be unaware of that. So I'm not hearing the same that you may be hearing about the leash law. I am hearing that there's a need to have the dogs run, and we have a solution in place right now.
RB, dog issues in East Palo Alto?
Yeah, what a quality of life. There is an issue, as a matter of fact, and it's completely different from what I sense Paul responding to and what I think Gary has been going through. I had a conversation not long ago with the president of the school board, Mr. Bamani Sawatu, and we talked about, and in the course of that conversation it came about the number of dog bites. And I think you would be amazed at that number. Anytime, in my own personal feeling, anytime there's a dog that need a chain on it in terms of how you restrain it, then that dog has no business on the public right-of-way. And an issue that I am certainly going to, we are looking at right now, Mr. Swatu and myself, is how we can get some information about what have happened in other cities. We believe that, and I certainly believe that it's an act of intimidation by certain folks who have the kinds of dogs that are known to be vicious dogs, and to have them walking up and down the street, 2 and 3 of them at a time on chains, and you can hardly hold them and what have you. And so leash law to us, again, means something qualitatively different from what I think these gentlemen have to deal with. And so it is a problem with us, and it's something that we're going to try and put in place and address it.
Well, if I'm able to resolve the differences between dog owners and those who support more enforcement or stronger enforcement of leash laws, I think I should be allowed to arbitrate the differences between Sinn Féin and the Unionists in Northern Ireland. This is a very emotional issue, and the city has made a real effort to isolate the behavior issues and see if there isn't a way of at once continuing to enforce the leash law, which I believe is extremely important for the reasons which RB has articulated. At the same time, allow for the possibility of usage of city parks, perhaps several city parks, perhaps early in the morning and late at night for dogs off leash, maybe 6 to 8 a.m. or and then in the evening 8 to 10 p.m. In addition to that, we clearly need to establish more dog runs in the community. What we currently have isn't enough. And so that's our multi-point strategy to address this issue. Our police department has done a very good job over the last couple of months meeting with folks on all sides of this issue and trying to develop a compromise plan.
Well, I'm sure inquiring viewers will want to know, is there a mayoral dog out there? Do any of you own a dog?
Nope.
Cat. I still have access to a dog from my marriage, and I have visitation rights to a wonderful.
And where do you take that dog?
I take that dog, run it through Stanford, Foothills Park, and go to the mountains a fair amount with it.
So you've experienced this issue firsthand.
Absolutely.
Well, I'm sure this is also one that we will hear more about in the future. I believe we are also now ready to go with a third question from the community.
I'm wondering about children, because it seems like it's very expensive to send your kids to particular schools, private schools, and I guess to buy a house here is, you know, kind of out of the question, right? And to move into another community where it's not, the houses aren't expensive, you're looking at paying, or you're looking at either paying for your kids to go to a private school and sending them somewhere else, or you send them to a, you know, an average or mediocre or lousy public school.
We do live close to where I work, but close to where we work, there isn't any affordable housing for us in Menlo Park. Right?
I think the mayor's been doing a good job as far as the new development and the growth that he's bringing into the city and so on and so forth. The only complaint I have is that the housing market has become so, it's going up so far now and so inflated so much that a lot of the people who's been living in the community for a long time are having to move out, can't find affordable housing, rent control is almost out the window. And that's about the only complaint I have about the new growth in the industry that's coming in East Palo Alto.
A tough, intractable problem raised in a couple of different communities. How do we make housing affordable for the people who currently live here and the children of the people who live here who might like to live here someday? Gary, you want to take first crack at that one?
Well, it's another very difficult issue, and I believe that we should seek out every opportunity to develop affordable housing here where we can. At the same time, I think we need to recognize that this community has some values with respect to open space, with respect to scale, with respect to density. Despite those broad principles and political realities, we've done a very good job in Palo Alto over the last 20 years in creating something on the order of 1,500 affordable housing units. We have an opportunity at the old Palo Alto Medical Foundation site to build affordable housing there, and I believe this City Council is committed to doing so. Of course, the Hyatt Regency site is a second site where we can locate some affordable housing. There are several other locations in the community where we can place housing, particularly along transportation corridors. California Avenue, I think that area, there's an opportunity to build additional affordable housing. The Stanford development along Sand Hill Road will be adding something on the order of over 100 affordable housing units. So even though that isn't enough to address, you know, the larger issue, the fact that most housing in this area is completely unaffordable to mere mortals, at the same time we are doing what we can to add affordable housing. In addition, it's important for us to identify, to build housing for different groups as well. We've built housing for the developmentally disabled, and I think that we should look at alternative forms of housing as well.
Mayor Jones?
We've, again, I think that East Palo Alto probably have the highest BMR percentages than any city around.
Is it a 10% or a 15% program?
It's roughly 15% now.
Mm-hmm.
And we've taken advantage of every program imaginable to get first-time home buyers into our community and work those relationships out with the bank. We're currently in a discussion now with Fannie Mae to come in and assist folks with the credit and with the preparation of getting ready to buy a home, and so that some of the obstacles and perceptions that have been in place in the past will go away. We have finally, we are smart enough now to not be just concerned with loan officers from the bank, but to understand that the underwriters are the ones who really make the decisions. So we're trying to impact the lending companies at the underwriter level. Rent control is not out of order. We certainly have some concerns about the attitude of the constituency relative to rent control, but the cost of bill does not render rent control moot at all. As a matter of fact, it strengthens it, and in our community sometimes members may not understand that rent control is still in place. We're excited about the over 300 units of housing that will be in the university villages. The Wind River project has estimated 90 units of housing, and they're scattered housing throughout the community that smaller developments are bringing in. One of the measurement sticks that we use is the first source hiring as well. Now, with the shopping centers and with the new development that's coming in every instance we have a first source hiring. These jobs are paying from $8 an hour to $30 an hour to $36 an hour in some cases. Our citizens qualify for these jobs. We know that property value is going to go up with development. I mean, it's just you can't have one without the other. And so what do? Do we not have development? Do we just sit where we are and be a totally dependent community, or do we stand up and walk through the development process? We chose to stand up and walk. And so we're encouraging our citizens to get prepared for these jobs that we have put the vehicle in place so that they can in fact pay this higher rent and pay these mortgages that's going to become necessary with that. And I don't see, we have two ways of paying our bills as a city, of course, and that's retail sales and property taxes. And we can't back up on either one of those if we're going to guarantee our constituents the kind of services, the quality of services in life that they would expect.
Gary talked about the subsidized housing that's been built in Palo Alto. RB talked about some of the larger new development that's going on there. How is this being addressed in Menlo Park?
In similar ways, I think we do a lot of the same programs with the BMR. We have a redevelopment agency, so as a city, we can build housing, and we have to build housing. I just want to bring up 2 points I think that haven't been touched a little bit, and that's I'm pushing for a stricter definition of affordable. So in this particular case, I want affordable somehow to be that the median or the mean income in the community can actually afford to live in that home. I serious question, because of the property prices in Menlo Park, whether the market can do that. So that's one of the things we're seeing. Even if we increase the density of units, I think we did an exercise in our smart growth where we had to go up to 80 units per acre to make it 155 to 200,000, and there's no guarantee that the bidders market wouldn't bid those up. Those units would obviously be smaller, not good for families. So there's some question as to whether markets can solve that problem. The other thing that we have an opportunity to do in Menlo Park, and when I say this, staff shudders and everyone kind of, oh, don't let them say it. We do have the opportunity to recycle some commercial area that's not productive and rezone that for housing, and I think that that's really a good way. So we begin to add more of the housing base and slowly migrate some of the job base out to other locations where it may need to be in the Bay Area, so that we can, over time, create a land balance by moving some of these high job, low revenue producing office buildings, and we've got a lot of them in Menlo Park that really aren't serving our community, that are sitting on land that could be used for housing. That whole Middlefield area by where SRI is has lots of old office buildings. So that's another possibility to do the balance in Menlo Park.
The three of you, between you, have touched on a half dozen different tools in the toolbox to address this issue, but it seems to me they all address areas of substantial new opportunity. In other words, it works on a larger scale. What about on a finer grain within the existing residential neighborhoods? Do we have opportunities for second units or duplexes or an ability to work with a scalpel and not a sledgehammer to add to the supply to meet the demand? Quick responses on that?
Yeah, in our East O'Keefe area in particular, those houses, those apartment units were built to accommodate, I think, Stanford students and that kind of lifestyle in those years, and now they've turned into family residences. I can envision a partnership at some point between the city and apartment owners in an effort to convert and to do some conversions to go from the typical 1 bedrooms that was popular some time ago, or 2 bedrooms for that matter, to 3 and 4 bedrooms. And I think that we could partner together to get the low interest kind of loans that will make it possible for this to happen. Public safety is certainly a key to what people want to do to their property. It's attitudinal, it's emotional, it's psychological, it's all of those things. And we have done, I think, an excellent job in terms of our public safety perception and prospects with our community. Folks feel better about where they live and how they live. So folks are coming in now for permits to do additions, to do repair on their homes, to make them look better, to bring up, the quality and the standard of what those houses look like. So very certainly we're not interested in tearing everything down, and we're trying to do what we can do to enhance folks who are there, who in fact have been very neglectful of their properties. I mentioned code enforcement. This is another effort to get folks to fix up their property, to make it more productive and enhance the quality of life for people.
Gary, what about Palo Alto? Should it be looking at rezoning its R1 to R2 to allow for its housing needs to be met?
I wouldn't be in office very long, Owen. Neither would you if we supported such an action. I think we need to work very closely with the community, again, acknowledging that there are some political realities associated with making decisions like this. We've had a couple of debates about the issue of grandfathering in mother-in-law units and allowing use of second units and possibly allowing garages to be converted to residential units. The community is not there yet. It's not willing to accept such changes in R1 areas. I think we may be able to do that in mixed zone areas, and I think we should look aggressively at doing that over the next few years. But I think it's going to be a long time before we'll be able to do it in R1 areas, largely because of the, not so much because of the concern over use of those units as living facilities, but mostly because of the concerns associated with parking and impacts associated with additional people living in those properties.
We're going to take a break here for a minute. When we come back, talk more with Mayor Colaci, Mayor Jones, and Mayor Fazzino about the issues affecting our region. This is Border Crossings.
Explore life's mysteries. Grasp the slippery existential moment. Meet others at the cosmic crossroads of meaning when you sign up for a class in video production at MPAC in Palo Alto. Initiate yourself as artist, communicator, or as a studio crew member on volunteer productions. Some call it community TV. We call it that too.
We're back with Border Crossings. My name is Owen Byrd, and again we have Mayor Paul Colaci from Menlo Park, Mayor R.B. Jones from East Palo Alto, and Mayor Gary Fazzino here addressing issues of regional significance. I understand that as part of the Mayor's Meeting series, that the three of you recently had your first meeting attended by representatives from Stanford, and that included President Gerhard Casper. Tell us what went on.
Mayor Casper, he was elected.
Mayor Casper.
Right. And Larry Horton was the city manager. Well, it was wonderful to have them present, and we continue to share a number of issues. There are transportation opportunities for us. The big surprise for me, of course, one of the items on our agenda was airport noise, and I didn't think that was going to be an issue that was very important to Stanford, only to find out that that's hot on the the Stanford homeowners agenda. They're right underneath the flight path of certain airplanes.
And the president himself felt very strongly about that particular issue.
Yes, he did.
He feels impacted by
He feels personally impacted by the flight patterns.
All those
associated with
international
SFO.
scholars coming in and out to Stanford. He's not afraid that we may interfere with Stanford's world-class reputation here?
Well, I think he's most concerned about the big sewer route, and I don't think world-class professors never come from Los Angeles.
They come from the east.
And the west.
Yeah. I was impressed because the president introduces himself as Casper the Ghost, but he's certainly not invisible. I was impressed with his knowledge of the issues. And Larry was there, of course, and either Larry did an excellent job of bringing him up to date on them, or he personally has have delved into what the issues are, and he participated at the table at the level not as just serving scrutiny, but the actual participation in terms of discussion, and I was impressed with that.
Did you feel he had a particular grasp of issues relating to East Palo Alto?
Yes, I did. Yes, when I talked about traffic and what happens on Saturday, the soccer games, football games, and what have you, and how East Palo Alto is impacted, he very certainly did acknowledge that he's aware of that.
There's certainly a long history of engagement in the East Palo Alto community by certain Stanford student and faculty groups, and I'm sure that that'll inform that relationship over time. Mm-hmm. What about with Palo Alto? What was your sense of President Casper's participation?
Well, I was delighted with his appearance there, and it's evident to me that Stanford intends to continue participating in these meetings. I think they recognized during the course of the meeting that we have many challenges in common. As I said earlier, they expressed a particular interest in working with us on transportation issues. RB mentioned alluded to the concern about traffic gridlock on University Avenue. I think Stanford recognizes that the tremendous commercial development over the past few years in Palo Alto and Stanford contributes significantly to that gridlock, and therefore Stanford needs to be part of the solution. They're interested in working with us on the Dumbarton Rail service issue, and in fact, Assemblymember Ted Lempert is convening a meeting tomorrow, Wednesday, July 21st, on this very subject. Second, given the tremendous success associated with the Stanford Marguerite shuttle system, Stanford has a real interest in working with Palo Alto and Menlo Park as we get our shuttle systems off the ground. And I think they are genuinely interested in exploring the possibility of merging the several systems, shuttle systems here in the Mid-Peninsula to provide the best service possible to Mid-Peninsula residents. Third, Paul mentioned the issue of airport noise. I think Stanford wants to be part of discussions regarding that issue. In addition to that, Stanford is an associate member of the Joint Powers Authority associated with long-term improvements to the San Francisco Creek to prevent the possibility of flooding. And given that so much Stanford land lies across the creek, and as Paul correctly pointed out, the watershed, that creek lies in Stanford land, Stanford needs to be at the table regarding that issue. So we have much in common, and I believe that this relationship will continue.
Well, I have to warn all of you that President Casper will be, I'm sure, no slouch in oftentimes challenging mayoral negotiations. He, 10 years ago, was my professor for legislative process of all things when I was in law school, and he demonstrated then, and I'm sure he will demonstrate to you, a sophisticated grasp of the legislative process.
Share with us a trick that he taught you.
That'll have to be off camera. We have an opportunity here in our program to move on to a couple other issues that are of interest to residents of all the communities in this region. And the one I wanted to come back to was one that Mayor Fazzino mentioned, came up in your meeting with Stanford, and that's this issue of the local shuttles. Menlo Park has launched its version of the shuttle. Of course, Stanford has a terrific Marguerite program. Palo Alto is currently looking at what sort of shuttle it could launch. Tell us a little bit more about either the shuttle programs in your communities and how they could be integrated.
We have in Menlo Park 3 different sets of shuttles. We have Caltrain connection shuttles that run out to the employer areas west and east of 101. Those are largely funded either by Caltrain or partly by the employers themselves and by the city. They're well ridden. We have county-funded shuttles, 2 that come over the Dumbarton Bridge. They're called DB1, DB2, hopefully to pick up some of the East Bay traffic, again, come into the employer areas. Then we have target markets that we have gone after in the city of Menlo Park to kick off our shuttle program. So one of them is our senior shuttle, which is very popular, and that runs multi-jurisdiction, stops off at Stanford. We have another one, which is our midday, that goes across town during the midday. And then we ask, Stanford runs our Marguerite M line. We call it Menlo Marguerite, and they run a line for us. And we have conducted now a citywide shuttle study to look at how we can expand that and coordinate with the other entities. The key question in Menlo Park, we don't think that shuttles are the answer, but we think they're an important part of the answer. So we're going to have to look at how we want to target the shuttle strategy as either a complementary kind of service that augments or helps the regional carriers like the trains, or whether we want to try to I think a suggestion that you had been made, maybe try to spend a little bit more money and see if we can get the shuttles actually carrying some of the load. So that's a decision that we'll have to make, and we will definitely want to look for opportunities where we can connect and share with our neighbors and leverage our monies.
What sort of shuttle service, if any, is currently provided in East Palo Alto, or are there any plans?
We don't have any shuttle services currently. We are interested in a discussion that Gary has engaged in that talked about the possibility of their shuttle coming into East Palo Alto, coming at least up University Avenue to the Senior Citizen Center and making the turn there at that location and bringing people back and forth to that process. Stanford, Mr. Gebhardt did acknowledge the notion that so many of our residents work at Stanford. So many of our folks use Stanford, whether it's the university or the shopping center itself. And there's a need to move people in a way that's quite different from what it is now. As a matter of fact, we have been meeting with a group of folks who get off work at Stanford University Hospital at 11:15 at night, but the last bus leave coming back into the community around 10. So there's going to be some discussion around that. But at this point, the level of discussion have talked about the Palo Alto shuttle and how it could impact us. Certainly we want to talk with Menlo Park about the loop. If the shuttle service is now going to Sun and coming up Willow Road, coming back down University Avenue, we know that we're carrying the same people. The folks who come down University Avenue, as a matter of fact, spend a lot of time in Palo Alto and in Menlo Park, for that matter. And so we're going to be pursuing those discussions.
And in Palo Alto, coming to council soon.
Well, first let me make a contextual statement. We have devoted much of our energies over the past 10 years with respect to transportation to establish and sustain larger regional transportation systems. And I think we've done so very successfully. Approval of measures A and B in Santa Clara County, approval of a similar measure in San Mateo County, Caltrain improvements, light rail to North County. I believe our biggest challenge over the next few years is to focus on the development of a sub-regional transportation system, and I view the shuttle as being the most critical component of that. Palo Alto currently has special event shuttles. A number of our employers run shuttles between Caltrain and employment sites. The Marguerite from Stanford comes into Palo Alto. That's a good start, but Palo Alto needs to do much more. Before the end of my term as mayor, I want to participate in the dedication of the new Palo Alto shuttle system. I don't care if it means simply bringing the Marguerite 1 or 2 blocks further down University Avenue. I want to initiate this system. I have in my own mind a very grandiose plan for this system. I believe we need to devote sufficient dollars to make it a reality. We need to serve neighborhoods. We need to bring people from neighborhoods to community centers, to downtown California Avenue, to the Research Park, and then link up with Stanford, Menlo Park, and East Palo Alto. I would like to see a University Avenue shuttle, at the very least run to University Circle, and possibly an offshoot run to the Senior Center in East Palo Alto as well as Gateway 101. I would like to see a shuttle run to Menlo Park and connect to key locations in that area. This is all possible during the next year or two. Now, our challenge as Palo Alto City Council is to make sure that we put enough resources in place to get a successful system off the ground.
And your Planning Commission just expressed an opinion.
Very strong opinion on this, that's right.
There may not be the resources there to live up to that grand vision.
Well, I believe that the resources need to be there. We are looking at grant funding. We are looking at the possibility of securing private funding. A number of employers in our community would certainly benefit by establishment of such a shuttle system. And so we're looking at a variety of options. We will not put in place a system which requires people, I can assure you, we will not put in place a system which requires people to pay for each trip as they board the shuttle. I think that is a prescription for failure.
Isn't this issue of funding ultimately the most significant issue for local transit services? And would there be opportunities for the communities jointly to apply for funding that might not otherwise be available to each individual community?
Let me suggest a source. We have implemented, rather than the standard traffic impact fee where you build wider roads and make your problem worse, we've begun assessing shuttle mitigation fees, and we don't do a rational pricing, I think, would be per parking spot. And so then you could start to assess your shuttle mitigation fees based on parking. And in essence, you're starting to charge for parking and then put that back into shuttles. So we do that in Menlo Park. And we've been taking on some of the funding for shuttles. The regional fund, it's expensive to run a shuttle, and we have to compete for the regional funding. It's about $75,000 per shuttle. We're in danger of losing to more better used shuttles in different parts of the region. So I think the shuttle impact fee, particularly based off of parking, is a good way of getting local funding. And employers need to get the message, and I think they are getting the message, but it gives them an opportunity really to begin to start to contribute to...
Well, there's impact fee opportunities. What about funding sources at state or federal or regional level that might be available to us all together as opposed to communities individually? Do you think that's worth pursuing?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we've had preliminary conversations with individuals at both the regional and state level regarding possibility of support. I mean, certainly, if we were to tie this system directly to a laudable purpose, such as economic development in East Palo Alto, for example, we would probably have access to another source of funding. And yet, currently, we are competing for a significant amount of regional dollars to provide support for inauguration of this system.
And what have happened to Gary personally will put him closer to where that funding could come from.
And that means that Gary will be spending more time in Washington and may be able to assist in the search for some of these dollars?
I will do whatever I can.
We're pleased to hear it. Well, you know, as interested as the residents of this region are in the policy issues facing our communities, they're also interested in the people who provide leadership to their communities. So I'd like to take a different tack for the last few minutes of our show and ask each of you a couple of questions that are on a more personal level. And I'd like to begin with your enthusiasms for each other's community. Let me ask you, Gary, what facility or park or restaurant or whatever takes you to East Palo Alto, and what do you like about East Palo Alto? And RB, what do you like about Menlo Park? And Paul, what do you like about Palo Alto? Let's start with you. What's the attraction over in East Palo Alto that most draws you?
Well, City Hall, of course, is the most attractive part of East Palo Alto.
How unsurprising.
And I mean, it's been a joy working with RB and before him, Sharifa. On mutual issues of interest. In recent times, I have shopped at 3 different times now at Office Depot since it opened about a month and a half ago. And I've also had a couple of wonderful experiences touring East Palo Alto and discovering the agricultural history of the community. With respect to Menlo Park, my running route takes me through Burgess Park, and so I spend and by SRI, so I spend a significant amount of time there. I spend a significant amount of time on Santa Cruz Avenue among the shops there. And I do believe that I am part of an extraordinary sub-region, which includes Palo Alto, Menlo Park, and East Palo Alto.
I guess someone who lives a block from the creek can truly be called a regional resident.
Absolutely.
RB, what do you like about these other communities?
Menlo Park certainly has been, in terms of its diversity, has really been a community that I've admired. I like to see a lot of different people living in the same place and being a part of the same thing. I also look at Menlo Park in terms of its cleanliness, and not that Palo Alto and other cities are not clean, but Menlo Park have a really a clean perception. The streets are lined well. It's really nicely done, and no fences and that kind of thing I'm really attracted to. And I've had a history, even when I was on the school board, of course, of working with the politicians from Ted Sorensen years all the way back to some others with folks in Menlo Park. Palo Alto, believe it or not, the most attractive thing about the whole area to me is Palo Alto's nightlife. I love to come to Palo Alto at night.
I've seen you there.
Yeah, I love to come to Palo Alto at night. It's a great, joy. It's a great kind of relaxation and fun to be on University Avenue at 10:30 at night. It really is. I love that. I like the fact that I can even walk downtown to taxis at night. I'm not plugging for taxis, but you know, just that whole thing. I was at Beppo's Sunday night at 11 o'clock. It was just nice to be able to just walk down, and people are everywhere and walking and talking and whatever else. And so in my own community, I envision a Beale Street image, and my peers know exactly what I'm talking about at the Beale Street in Memphis, where it's that exact same kind of environment. The only difference is that Beale Street in Memphis have a lot of music, and Palo Alto don't have that at this point, but the nightlife is there. And I envision that Bay Road corridor in East Palo Alto as being the place that I would walk to, as opposed to just in Palo Alto in just a couple of years.
Paul, we've got just a minute. Your favorite place or two in East Palo Alto? Or
well,
Palo Alto?
my neighbor's house is a nice place. I live East Palo Alto and Menlo Park share the Willows, so both towns are there. I like to go down and shop at the Hardware in University Circle, so it's currently a local serving retail, and I take advantage of it. And we were buying a nice digital camera last night at the Good Guys. In Palo Alto, my favorite area is California Ave. So I like to ride my bike down Bryant, which is a beautiful expressway, and take that wonderful underpass over to the California Ave area, and maybe go to Printers Ink or have a cup of coffee. But I really like that area. I think you've done a wonderful job with it.
I have to mention Kepler's. I still buy 80% of my books from Kepler's rather than from Amazon.com. It is a remarkable regional resource.
So living proof that we really are one region when even the mayors spend so much time in each other's communities. Well, I want to let our viewers know that this has been Border Crossings. We have visited today with Mayor Paul Colaci from Menlo Park, Mayor R.B. Jones from East Palo Alto, Mayor Gary Fazzino from Palo Alto. And this will be a continuing program presented here on the Mid-Peninsula Access Channel. This show will air again on Sunday, August 1st on Channel 77 at 7:05, Wednesday, August 4th here on Channel 6 at 10 p.m., and Wednesday, August 11th on Channel 6 at 10 p.m. And this show will continue in the future with discussions with all the police chiefs, social service providers, and residents of the other communities. But we certainly hope that the three mayors will continue to take the time to come back and make themselves available to the viewers to express their current thoughts and concerns for our region. So thanks to each one of you individually, to Paul Colaci, to R.B. Jones, and to Gary Fazzino. And again, my name's Owen Byrd, and thank you very much for having been with us this time on Border Crossings.